Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History Ehx early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. If I say the name Elvis, what do you think? Do you hear jailhouse rock, imagine blue suede shoes? Or do you think of the man who defied gravity by pioneering the quadruple jump in competition and in the process won 7 Canadian championships, 3 world championships, and an Olympic silver? He is an undeniable legend, and his path to glory began over 30 years ago.
It still shocks me that people remember. I always say, thank God for YouTube. I competed for so many years, and I forget that, a 12-year span of world championships and Olympics, that's a long time. And usually the average is like 5 to 6 years. And I was there double that. And that to me, it brings a huge smile on my face. And I forget how many people watched skating back then.
I'm Craig Baird. This is Canadian History Ehx Biography, where every other week I sit down with prominent Canadians to learn how being Canadian has influenced their success. Today, I bring you one of the best known names in his sport, who also happens to be one of Canada's most successful figure skaters of all time. This is Elvis Stojko. Elvis's incredible rise to the top of the world began not in Canada, but in Europe.
Because my parents were both immigrants from Europe. They came in 56 and 57. My mom escaped that Russian insurgents. They call her a 56er from Hungary. And my dad came from Slovenia, Yugoslavia in 57. I'm first generation Canadian. So they came in and became Canadians, immigrants and refugees from a really bad time, a very difficult time in their countries. So Canada was sort of a haven for them during that time.
Steve Stojko and his future wife Irene escaped the growing influence of the Soviet Union in the mid to late 1950s. The 1956 Hungarian Revolution, also known as the Hungarian Uprising, was a spontaneous revolt against the communist government of Hungary and its Soviet-backed policies. The revolution began on October 23, 1956, and it was viciously crushed by Soviet tanks and troops 12 days later, on November 4th. Thousands of people were killed and wounded, and nearly 250,000 Hungarians fled the country. Irene was one of the many that arrived on Canadian shores looking for a better life. Steve, meanwhile, was in Slovenia, which became part of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia following the re-establishment of Yugoslavia at the end of the Second World War. The political leadership of Yugoslavia, under Joseph Tito, often opposed Soviet leadership under Joseph Stalin, and because of economic and personal freedoms were somewhat broader than in the rest of the Eastern Bloc. From the late 1950s onward, dissident circles formed, but Steve was still living behind the Iron Curtain, and he longed for freedom. As Elvis mentioned, he arrived in Canada in 1957.
My parents both are very, very driven, and both my parents being very competitive, athletic. My mom was a dancer from Hungary. My dad was a singer, but he also did athletics and things like that, played soccer and all sorts of other stuff. And just probably he's a little guy. He's 89 now, but probably pound for pound, the strongest guy I've ever met, just in physical strength. He like a little tank, and he did everything old school from the old country. And he was the oldest of 10, my mom being the second youngest of 9 in her family, huge families. And it was just a different time. They had me later in life. My parents were both born in the 30s. 1930s. So they had me later on. So their view of the world was very different than the baby boomers, or Gen X or whatever later on. So it's about survival. It's all about the survival instinct. And to them, because everything, it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't easy. There was a lot of different things that we had to go through. And my parents were both a huge inspiration for me, because what they went through to come to Canada, there's some pretty crazy stories on what they went through, escaping their countries to go through Austria to get out of that situation, and just that human resilience. And I was just very fortunate that I could actually perform and be in a sport where I could go after my dreams. And to be able to share that with them and give that to them, that enjoyment back to them, made me feel balanced as well, because they sacrificed so much for that. And, speaking with my mom about it, my dad, it was hard, but they do it all over again, which is pretty cool.
The couple met in Canada and soon fell in love and married and had a son on March 22nd, 1972 in Newmarket, Ontario. They shared a love of the music of Elvis Presley, and they named their newborn after him. The couple worked hard and through grit and determination built a life for their family in Canada.
They met here in Canada and they created their life here, started up a company. My mom had a cleaning company with my dad, and then my dad became a landscaper, and they did so many different things to make ends meet. They worked all types of jobs to put money away and create a life for themselves here.
From a young age, Elvis's parents exposed him to skating, and while hockey was popular among his friends, Steve and Irene Stojko's heart belonged to figure skating.
My first inkling when I was around 2.5, watching television, somebody was spinning. My parents always had skating on TV. They loved watching skating. And eventually I got on the ice when I was around 4 or 5 years old. And it was just the athleticism and the spinning and the jumping and all the cool moves and everything that goes along with it that I was attracted to. That was a big part of what got me out there. And I remember, like, the first time I was on the ice with a helmet and snowsuit going out, I was already trying to do stuff and falling down and playing around, but it was like a sort of like a duck to water and continued throughout my career. But it was just seeing it on TV and just going, I want to do that. And that's how it all started.
When Elvis first hit the ice, figure skating wasn't the sport he would go on to inherit. The heavy favorites at the 1974 Canadian Championship were 5-time pair Canadian champions Sandra and Val Bezic, who were forced to withdraw from the senior pairs event due to Sandra's leg injury. Sandra Bezic would go on to become a prolific figure skater, choreographer, producer, and television commentator. In 1975, during training for the 1976 Olympics, she tore her ankle ligaments and turned pro. Her voice would be heard on broadcasts across Canada and the US as Elvis made history on the ice. And for several years, she was the director, co-producer, and choreographer for Stars on Ice, for which she won an Emmy Award in 2003. But at the time Elvis was watching, he was most likely dazzled by 4-time and defending Canadian champion, 25-year-old Toller Cranston. He had won the 1974 World Bronze Medal and would go on to win the 1976 Olympic Bronze Medal, and is credited by many with having brought a new level of artistry to men's figure skating. It took some time for Elvis's parents to find a Learn to Skate program, but eventually they discovered the Newmarket Figure Skating Club. As Elvis said, he took to skating like a duck to water, and he tried to do everything he saw on television. He was also one of the few boys in a skating program that was dominated by girls. But as Elvis perfected his skills on the ice, a change was happening in the sport, and Canada's Brian Orser became a serious contender on the international stage. And every so often, he stopped by to meet with local skaters to inspire them to follow their dreams. Stojko said that he always remembered those days because they gave him an added boost to what he hoped to achieve, which started early. At 5 years old, Elvis entered his first club competition, which he won. His raw talent, hard work, and dedication helped him progress quickly, and by 9 years old, he started to skate for the Toronto Cricket Skating Club and Curling Club in the junior division. For the family, it was a lot of sacrifice. Elvis was up at 3:30 a.m. on practice and competition days. He took a hot bath to warm up, and then it was off on the morning drive to the club with his mom. And these drives were often in winter. The weather wasn't always the best. Nonetheless, his mother always got him to the skating club and supported him as he flew around the ice. Elvis said years later that the car became his dining room, dressing room, study room, and rest area. After a few years in Toronto, Elvis progressed to the point he had outgrown the club and moved on to the Mariposa Skating Club, the same club his hero, Brian Orser, trained at. It would be his home for most of his amateur career.
I grew up watching Brian Orser, our Canadian champion at the time and world champion, Scott Hamilton and Brian Boitano, Joseph Zabovchik, as well as Alexander Fadeev. These are guys, Czech Republic and from the US, and these are all skaters that I watched right from even with Robin Cousins from 1980 up, and all in the 80s. And I had a fortunate time to be able to train with Brian on his last couple of years, getting ready for Olympics in Calgary in 1988. And for me, that was an amazing time to see how he prepared. I learned so much that allowed me to groom me for the next generation of skaters.
Orser had begun making his mark on the skating world in the early 1980s, and by 1983 he had won his first world medal, a bronze. Then he became the first man to land a triple axel at the Olympics when he landed it in his free skate at the 1984 Winter Olympics. He won the silver medal behind Scott Hamilton, and then won the silver at the 1984 Worlds, again behind Hamilton. Orser resolved to begin including two axles, not just one, and finally won Worlds in 1987 by becoming the first skater at the World Championships to land two triple axels in the free skate and three in the same competition. Now by 1988, Elvis was at the same skating club as Orser trained for the Olympics, which would become known as the Battle of the Bryans. Because Orser's main rival was Brian Boitano, to whom he had not lost a competition since the 1986 Worlds. He was undefeated as he served as the flag bearer for Canada during the Calgary 1988 opening ceremonies. And Elvis watched as Orser lost the battle against Boitano by a mere 0.1 points. A year later, Elvis burst onto the national figure skating scene. He finished second at the 1990 Canadian Championships in Sudbury, to the surprise of many who wondered who this young skater was. Ahead of him was another man who would help Canadians dominate the sport in the 1990s, Kurt Browning.
Kurt was there because I saw Kurt before I even got to compete at the senior level. And I saw him coming up as a junior and then competing at the world level his first few years. And then our two, I guess, timelines crossed where he was still competing. I came in and then he went out and I continued. So it was an amazing time in skating.
Following his incredible performance at Nationals, Elvis and Kurt skated at the World Championships. Kurt had a lot to prove at the 1990 Worlds in Halifax, and in front of a sellout crowd of nearly 10,000 adoring fans at the Metro Centre, the defending world champion took to the ice to the full support of his country, and he did not disappoint. He landed 7 triple jumps, but didn't include the quadruple toe loop, which had become his trademark since he first entered the record books when he landed it in competition at the 1988 World Championships in Budapest. Kurt Browning won his second world title in a row and became the first Canadian in 42 years to win 2 world singles titles. Barbara Ann Scott was the only other one to manage that. But the 1990 World Figure Skating Championships were memorable for Elvis. At 17 years old, Elvis Stojko of Richmond Hill, Ontario, had finished 9th in Halifax. A year later, at the 1991 World Championships, Elvis entered the record books by becoming the first person to land a quadruple double jump combination. This incredibly difficult maneuver involves the skater performing 4 revolutions while in the air. Then, as soon as the skater lands back on the ice, they immediately take off again for a second jump. And at the time, it was extremely difficult and rarely accomplished flawlessly, let alone in competition where the stakes are even higher. Elvis said years later, he studied the tapes of skaters like Kurt Browning to perfect the jump, which helped him finish 6th at the Worlds. The next season, both Elvis and Kurt prepared for the 1992 Winter Olympics in Albertville, France. No Canadian had ever won an Olympic gold medal in men's singles. Kurt, as world champion, was facing massive pressure and tremendous expectations. But a nagging back injury forced him to take 6 weeks off, which meant he would miss the Canadian Figure Skating Championships in January 1992. In his absence, Michael Slipchuk upset Elvis, who was 19 years old, to take the gold medal and become Canadian champion. In February 1992, both Slipchuk and Stojko joined Kurt Browning in a little town in the Alps for the 16th Olympic Winter Games. This would be Elvis's Olympic debut, and on the blades of a technically strong routine finished 7th. For Kurt Browning, it was heartbreak. The reigning world champion had the dream of an Olympic gold snatched away from him, and he finished 6th, just ahead of Elvis. The results, though, were a bit controversial. The gold went to Ukraine's Viktor Petrenko, who fell near the end of his program and doubled many planned triple jumps. It had many wondering why American Paul Wiley wasn't the overall winner. And in another shocking decision by judges, Elvis had been downgraded despite landing 8 brilliant triples in his free skate to finish in 7th. Regardless, Elvis's performance once again showed the world that he was a rising star. Thankfully, the Canadians didn't see each other as threats. Instead, they pushed each other to be the best on and off the ice. And in the process, Elvis got a unique perspective on the country his parents had chosen to make their home.
So for me, it was, like I said, it was a place that it was a haven for my parents when they shared stories for me. And then also competing and representing Canada, we always had that competition with the US, and people were like, oh, it's very similar to the US. And we're like, no, it's not. Canada's Canada, US is US. We may speak the same language, but there's a different feel for Canada. And I know you spoke about hockey is hockey here in Canada, and figure skating and winter sports are a huge part of it. So winter sports and Olympics were always very synonymous with Canada. I always felt that we have a pride that, a certain level of the way we look at ourselves as athletes, especially going to the Winter Olympics. We place ourselves at a high level, which I think we deserve to anyways, because we have amazing talent here. And I think that over the years, I've had a great sense of pride representing Canada and wearing the maple leaf. And it has always been such an honor and pleasure.
The 7th place finish at the Olympics had been disappointing for Elvis, but it would be the last time for a long while that he wouldn't finish on or very near the figure skating podium. Only 1 month after the Olympics, Elvis took bronze at the 1992 World Championship behind Victor Petrenko and Kurt Browning. A year later, at the 1993 World Championships, he finished 2nd behind, you guessed it, Kurt Browning. Now the name Elvis was on the lips of every sports fan of Canada, but that didn't mean that his figure skating career was paying the bills. In fact, the opposite was true.
My dad had to work super hard to get me through skating. He was my sponsor, running his own company. My mom went with me everywhere. So she did all the bookkeeping for my dad, but she looked after me, taking me to the rink and to school and back and forth. And my dad running that landscaping company. And in the summers too, I worked with him to help him. And summers and sometimes in the winter when the snow was really bad, he did snow removal. So it wasn't always easy. It wasn't easy to get through it all. We had to work on our own to make it work. And, there was a number of people that helped along the way that kind of bridged the gap on a few things. But, where you have countries, especially like Russia, where, or even China, where they have, they take kids that are talented, and then if they're talented, and they put them with a coach, and then they're looked after. Like they don't have to worry about anything to get the best of everything. Focus on that. Like if I didn't have to worry about the money side, or parents didn't have to worry, more so my parents, things could have been a lot easier. But on the flip side too, it makes you appreciate so many other aspects to it, and the resilience. It makes you dig for it. And I believe everyone chooses their own destiny in some way. And being in skating, my parents loving it so much, and me being involved and me loving it so much. And it makes you dig deep and makes you see how badly you want it. And my parents, they always said to me, if you want to do this 100%, you want to go to the Olympics, you want to become a champion, we're going to support you 1,000%. But the day you're like just doing it for recreation, you're just playing. It's, we're not going to sacrifice, right? Because it's different, and you wouldn't expect them to. But we worked as a team, like this business, and we worked at it, the three of us, and we had, different coaches and people we've worked with over the years. But my parents and I had worked really, really hard. And, like I said, mostly it was about just getting the bills paid, looking after the house, and then also the bills paid, because skating is very, very expensive. And, just fortunate that I was able to have that opportunity. My dad worked his butt off. A lot of times he didn't go. He once in a while he would be at one of the Olympic Games for like a day or two, and then he had to fly home. I know he was there in, I think it was Lillehammer in 94, and I think Salt Lake he came out to that one, but the other two he couldn't come to because in the thick of winter you'd have a snowstorm, and he had to be home to look after the business. But my mom was with me on all the big events, and was there on my formative years. And I can't thank them enough for all the support that if it wasn't for them, and what they put in and what we sacrificed as a family, it wouldn't have happened.
Elvis just mentioned Lillehammer in 1994, which came on the heels of his first national title after finally beating Kurt at nationals with his Bruce Lee routine. The competition between the two Canadians gripped the nation. Maclean's wrote in 1994, "Kurt Browning and Elvis Stojko probably deserve a better fate than to have grown up in the same country. Anywhere else, Kurt would have coasted to his national championship. Anywhere else, Elvis would have been king long ago. Their clash of great and contrasting talents has drawn enormous attention to recent Canadian championships. The media barrage made Kurt versus Elvis sound like the main event in some sort of blood sport." While the media sometimes portrayed the two as bitter competitors, in truth, both were friends and they saw each other as teammates.
We had so many fans that came out to watch, and it's changed so much now since then. But we were in sort of a golden era from the 80s into the 90s, and it was really blessed to be a part of that. But there were so many great skaters that I looked up to, even with Liz Manley, who was our Canadian medalist at Olympics in '88, and Tracy Wilson and Rob McCall and Lloyd Eisler and Isabelle Brasseur, and these are all heroes of mine that I watched, and I got to skate with a lot of them in shows and actually compete on the team with them.
Elvis arrived in Lillehammer hoping to improve on his performance from 2 years earlier. His usual rivals were Victor Petrenko and Kurt Browning. But then, the International Skating Union changed the rules and allowed skaters who turned professional to return. So Elvis would be skating against his hero's main rival, Brian Boitano, who had turned pro in 1988 and would now be competing at the 1994 Winter Olympics. His rivals struggled in the short program, which put Elvis in a very good position to capture a medal as he sat in second, heading in to the final day of competition. Now, after a great performance in the free skate, Elvis won his first Olympic medal, a silver. But as you know, the spotlight wasn't on men's skating in 1994. The world tuned in to watch the drama unfold between Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. After Harding admitted to helping to cover up an attack which took place on January 6th when Harding's ex-husband, Jeff Gillooly, and his friend, Sean Eckhart, conspired with Shane Stant to club Kerrigan in the knee. The United States Olympic Committee had initiated proceedings to remove Harding from the Olympic team, but she retained her place after threatening legal action and in the process thrust figure skating into the stratosphere. TV ratings were massive and figure skating was incredibly popular. And in the midst of all of that, Elvis Stojko was on the podium wearing a silver medal. One of only 2 medals won at those Olympics by Canadian figure skaters. The other was a bronze won in the pairs team of Isabelle Brasseur and Lloyd Eisler. Maclean's wrote of Elvis's performance in 1994. "Stojko is a precise technician who makes a grueling roster of jumps look easy. But as he has matured, his performances have grown more natural and assured." Canadian figure skater Brian Orser said, "Maybe one day Elvis will play a character like Kurt does, but right now he is being Elvis. This is not as easy as it sounds. It takes a lot of confidence to go out there and just be yourself. Through watching Elvis skate, you know exactly what kind of person he is." By the end of 1994, Elvis was at the top of the skating world and he seemed to be unstoppable. He won his first world championship in Japan that year, and he would go on to win 3 more and continue Canada's dominance in the event. In the 10 years from 1987 to 1997, Canadian skaters won 8 world championships. And after years of work and sacrifice, Elvis Stojko had put his stamp on the sport, and his life was never going to be the same.
Honestly, I didn't get any sponsors until I actually won Worlds. I was like second and third in the world. I was known in Canada. I was known in the world. But to get sponsors at the time, it was really hard. Even when skating was at its peak, and I had to win nationals and win worlds, and then all of a sudden everything came in. But by that point, I've already kind of made it. So it's the journey up that's the hard part, right? So I know that there's, in the States, there's more people, there's more money. The US it's a lot easier based on the way the way the US is with the capitalism and companies and money and all of that.
As Elvis reached the height of his career, his body threw in a couple wrenches into the mix. While practicing for the 1995 Canadian Championships, Elvis suffered a serious ankle injury. But he was undeterred. Instead of sitting out, Elvis took part in the short program at the Canadian Championship, but he was unable to finish. What could have been the end of his season wasn't, because Elvis was able to compete a few months later at the World Championships. He finished second in the short program behind American Todd Eldridge and won the free skate by completing a triple Lutz triple toe loop combination. The Lutz is the second most difficult jump behind the axel because it involves the skater taking off from a backwards outside edge and landing on the back outside edge of the opposite foot. When done in combination, it means once the skater lands, they will take off almost immediately to complete the toe loop before landing again on the back outside edge of the same foot. Now imagine doing that on a bad ankle as the pain shoots up your leg. Now try and do that without making it seem like it hurts. Sometimes I trip just walking through my house with two healthy ankles. Elvis landed that difficult jump in combination on his way to capturing his second world championship. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Canadians being at the top of the podium at the Worlds is almost always a certainty. First, Brian Orser dominated, then Kurt Browning, and now it seemed it was Elvis's turn. Heading into the 1996 World Championships in Edmonton, Elvis was once again a favorite. He often secured his podium finishes with his jumps, so when he fell during his triple axel combo and finished in 7th at the end of the short program, Canadians were right to worry. In the free program, Elvis rebounded with a quadruple jump combination that moved him up to 4th. He may have been off the podium, but he entered the record books again and became the reigning king of the quad when he landed the first quadruple toe loop, triple toe loop in competition. He cemented his dominance in the sport by winning the Champions Series final in 1997, and he returned to the World Championships as a favorite. And after a strong short program, Elvis was 4th. But once again, he went into God mode on the ice and landed a quad triple combination, which earned 2 perfect 6.0 scores on his way to pick up his 3rd World Championship. Elvis Stojko was the best men's figure skater in the world and the heavy favorite to capture gold at the 1998 Winter Olympics in Nagano. Unfortunately, Elvis Stojko was dealing with a growing injury. On top of that, he contracted a terrible flu that had spread through the Olympic Village, but he refused to take painkillers for the injury because it could lead to a failed drug test. The pain was bad enough that he considered taking a home remedy offered by a Japanese family his mother was staying with. Once again, he refused, worried about doping tests, and throughout the warm-up he was stiff and sore. He hoped to complete a quadruple toe loop, but he downgraded it to just a triple. He then landed a triple axel and, in his words, felt something snap. He hurt his hip even further. But that was not going to stop him. Elvis pulled from the deepest recesses of determination and completed his program, including landing not 1, but 4 triples. He didn't win the gold, but he did pick up his 2nd silver for Canada. His coach, Doug Lay, said, "If there was a medal for bravery, he would win it, hands down." Gold medal winner Ilya Kulik went up to Elvis after he finished his skate and told him he respected him as a great sportsman. To date, no Canadian has ever won gold in men's single figure skating. Brian Orser and Elvis Stojko came the closest with 2 silvers in a row, and Patrick Chan won silver in 2014. Now, despite competing for a decade in figure skating, which included 3 consecutive Olympics, which is rare in any sport, Elvis still had plenty left in the tank to win more titles. He picked up a silver at the 2000 World Championship and a gold at the 4 Continents Championship that same year. He added 4 more Canadian championships to his legendary figure skating resume in 1998, 1999, 2000, and 2002. And in 2002, he returned to the Winter Olympics for the 4th and final time, this time placing 8th. He was the only Canadian to finish in the top 25. And after that, he made the decision to end his amateur career and begin a new chapter in his life. But he wasn't hanging up his skates. Instead, he was turning pro. Even though Canada had dominated men's figure skating before and during his time as an amateur, Elvis is always surprised at how different things were for American skaters.
The Americans have a very strong sense of themselves, and they've always been America and that's always been, competition. They're very, very, some of my best competitors were American, and absolutely to this day, we're still really good friends and close, and it's awesome. And Canadians, I don't know, it's more of sort of it's competitive, but it's like you said, it's just under the surface. It's not so much in your face. And I don't know where that comes from, why it's like that. It just seems to be the way Canadians have always been. And in kind of lack of a better term, it's like not being overshadowed by the US, but we kind of don't, it's kind of just underneath that surface. And like I said, I don't know exactly where it started or why, but it's something that we're getting a little bit more aggressive in some ways, I think, in the sports. I mean, when Toronto won with the basketball team. I don't follow basketball, but I did remember when the Raptors won. It was that was holy cow. It was like, oh, this is our time, and finally, and it was just like, holy cow, the Canadians are coming out with a bit more aggressive attitude.
That is something that always set Elvis apart from the competition. He didn't politely ask for a win. He took it. His jumps and his programs had a confidence not often seen on the ice. So when he left amateur sports behind, there was a bit of a vacuum in the sport, which was filled by Russian skaters Alexei Yugin and Evgeny Plushenko. But the love for competition was never far, and prior to the 2006 Winter Olympics, he asked to be reinstated as an Olympic-eligible skater, but then changed his mind and truly left his amateur career behind for good. He bid a farewell to his impressive career by performing a gala at the Mariposa Skating Club in Barrie, Ontario. And by then, he had spent many years living in Mexico, which gave him a unique perspective on what it meant to be Canadian.
It seems like Canada is always the nice guy. It's always like that. I lived in Mexico for 12 years, and they looked at Canadians as always being friendly and nice. And, and that sometimes can be misjudged for having a bit of weakness, but then we go to compete, especially when we take pride in hockey and stuff like that. So we do have a competitive instinct in us, of course. But I think it's always been that way where we go out and we do our thing. We enjoy what we do. It's like we're not always in your face all the time. It's just we just carry a different way of approaching competitive sports, but also just being nice people. And I've not everyone's nice. We always have people that are not that nice, but it's just generally speaking, we've always had that sort of image. And, I've traveled everywhere around the world and of course lived in another country too. So that would be the main thing, that people see us and have that image of us.
The competitive edge is what he brought to the sport and something he wished figure skating had more of. While commentating during the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver, British Columbia, he was critical of the judging. He wrote for Yahoo Sports under the headline, "The Night They Killed Figure Skating," which drew controversy because he pointed out Evan Lysacek's gold medal winning performance in the men's single, arguing that his program was technically comparable to older, less demanding programs and that even junior skaters could achieve similar results. He felt the new judging system, which had been introduced a few years earlier, did not adequately reward skaters who attempted and landed difficult quadruple jumps, which he believed were essential to the sport. The quad jump controversy initiated by Elvis's criticism has continued to resurface, as many feel, like him, that the new scoring system prioritizes consistency over risk-taking and difficulty, making it less rewarding for skaters who attempt challenging jumps. At the 2025 World Championships, American Ilya Malinin put the controversy to bed when he landed 6 quadruple jumps in his World Championships free skate. He landed a quad flip, Lutz and loop, axel plus a toe loop, and a salchow, each in combination. It was the first time a skater landed all 6 types of quads in one program without having any called for under rotation. For his part, never one to sit around and with a passion for adrenaline, Elvis returned to his other passion, one that he had always had since he was a child: racing. He got a dirt bike for his 7th birthday, and it sparked a love for motorsports. And while skating and between training, he attended performance driving schools to hone his racing skills. He hoped that when he retired, he could begin his racing career without worry of injury. And just like with figure skating, he excelled at racing. In 2013, he became the Canadian Vice Champion of Canada in the Rotax DD2 Masters class. 2 years later, he finished 3rd. And while racing, he also continued to skate and officially returned to the rink in 2016 as part of the Canadian Tour of Stars on Ice. With Stars on Ice, he has been given the opportunity to travel Canada once more and in the process, appreciate the place he calls home.
I think generally we see ourselves all as Canadian, but we do have a connection to the root of where we're living, especially for people that have born and were raised there, especially for Newfoundland. I love Newfoundland. It's one of my favorite places to go. One of my best friends lives there, and I've done tons of shows there. It's a great place. When I come there, they embrace me with open arms. It's such a wonderful place. And there's a culture there. There's sort of there's a bit of the Irish background, because I know a lot of people have come from the UK and Ireland have come over and lived there. So there's roots there. Of course, the Viking roots, which is way in the north too. I've skated up in St. Anthony's, which is an amazing place. I like to go in the summer because I was there during the winter and there's a lot of snow there. New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, of course, Quebec has their own thing. They have such a different culture, especially in different areas too. Whether you go to Montreal or Quebec City, which I absolutely love, and I've always been. I have amazing fans there too. But their culture is their own. They still have a connection to Canada, and then you start moving out west, and it's interesting because It's hard to say. I can't put my finger on, but I can always tell if you've been living in Alberta, there's a different energy to that. I don't know if it's more laid back. Ontario, especially in Toronto, it's like the hustle and bustle, the New York of Canada. And then you get out there and it's more kind of laid back, like Calgary, and kind of do my thing, Edmonton, do my thing, because you have access to things like places like Banff and Canmore and all those wonderful places. And then BC too, it's got a different feel. And of course, with the Native people, Aboriginal people, First Nations, all of that too, in the northern sections of those provinces, there's different energy throughout Canada.
From April 25th to May 13th of this year, you can see Elvis at 10 Canadian cities from Halifax to Vancouver as he tours once again with Stars on Ice. He'll be joined by other great Canadian skaters like Keegan Messing and Madeline Shizas, all under the direction of Kurt Browning.
Kurt had some great ideas on different riffs and group numbers and things. So building on all of that, and then trying to come up with something that'll be seamless and work together in the show, because sometimes people will come with their own stuff. It's got to be able to gel. So there's a lot of other moving parts that have to work together. And again, working to train and be in shape for the numbers that you're running, stuff that's going to be entertaining. And it's just preparing for that. I know Kurt's getting ready to do a section of the tour in Japan first, which is going to keep him busy. He's leaving in a little bit. And then he just runs actually ideas by me too, to share some ideas going, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? We've been doing this for so long. So it's just sometimes when you get in your creative mind, sometimes you can get a little bit like pulled out of what you're, the practicality of what you're doing. So, Alyssa keeps him in line too. And because he's so creative, but it's great to collaborate a little bit and help out. And again, to have him on the tour, because I'm sort of the older statesman, and it's great to still have Kurt involved in this on the tour. It can be a grind, but again, that's overall, it's I love it. I mean, I love connecting to the fans, and this year with the rock and roll theme, which is what Kurt wanted to bring out, and I thought it was great, and it allows. It's just going to be a fun show.
I will include a link to the tour website in my show notes. It has been almost 20 years since Elvis retired from a career that spanned more than most other figure skaters. Remember, he was on the ice at 4 consecutive Olympics. For longevity, that's up there with LeBron James and Alexander Ovechkin. The only figure skater to outlast Elvis is Japan's Yuzuru Hanyu, who is aiming to compete at his 4th Olympics in 2026. But Elvis's legacy beyond the medal hall lies in the impact he made in Canada and in the hearts of the nation when he donned his skates to soar high above the ice.
It still shocks me that people remember. I always say, thank God for YouTube, because it was a number so many years ago. But even in the first, I'm doing interviews today, and one of the first interviewers was saying, yeah, back in the day, I remember, mom and dad were like, okay, tonight skating is on and we're watching Elvis. And it was a big thing. All the family came together and watched figure skating, and myself or Kurt. And I get so many of those stories. It brings tears to my eyes. I've had, these opportunities to do seminars across the country, and people will share stories of, my grandma loved you. She's passed away now, but I remember during the winter season, that was her thing. when I was little, I was like 5, 10, 12 years old. And we would sit and she'd say, we're watching Elvis tonight. He's competing. And that was a thing that we did as a family. We watched you. We huddle up in front of the television and we'd watch figure skating and we'd cheer you on. And, you know, I was there. I mean, I competed for so many years and I forget that, you know, a 12-year span of world championships and Olympics, that's a long time. And usually the average is like 5 to 6 years. And I was there double that. And I'm connecting to like 2 or 3 generations down. So sometimes I'm like, man, I've been around a while, but I started early and I ended later. And it's sometimes it brings a tear to my eye because there's people that are like, yeah, we miss those times because that reminds me, you connect me to my grandmother, or you connect me to my mom or my dad that actually loved watching you. He would not watch figure skating. It was only hockey. But when you were on, my dad came and watched it because you're a dude. It was just the way they said it. You're a dude. And I was just like, okay, you know, and that was just something they could identify with, you know, a guy that rode dirt bikes and was into cars and all this other stuff and martial arts. And my dad just loved that. Or my grandfather loved that. And that to me, it brings a huge smile on my face. And I forget how many people watched skating back then. And it's so different now because, yeah, we have accessibility to so many different things online, but people don't. It's different now because it's so individualized. You can have your own little section of shows and things you want to watch, but then you don't share it with the family. Back then, it was like it came on a certain time of the year and everyone had to watch it at that time unless they taped it. So you couldn't rerun unless you taped it, and everyone huddled together. And there's these family moments that we don't get that anymore.
As he travels the country, he's proud of how Canadians have a way of coming together.
I think overall, Canada pulls together. We'll be in different provinces, but then when we need to come together as a nation, you can feel that we're all Canadian. And I think that that's pretty amazing. I felt that over the years anyways, especially competing at like a world championship that was held in Canada. My very first Worlds was in Halifax. And man, did I ever feel that national love. And no matter where you were from, because there's so many people that traveled from other parts of the country to support the Canadian team in Halifax. And again, in Edmonton, about 6 years later, when I competed there as well. So I definitely feel that every province has its own culture and energy, a way of being, speaking, accents, isms. But then, looking at it as a whole, we're just Canadians.
I would like to thank Elvis Stojko for sharing his time with me. In 2 weeks, we will be back with another episode of Canadian History Ehx Biography.
Because my father was born a Newfoundlander. He wasn't born a Canadian. When Canada joined Newfoundland in 1949, Dad was actually one of the reporters who covered Confederation for the Daily News. So he sat there during the debates and reported on them. And becoming Canadian, for my dad's generation, Dad was a bit of an older fella. He was born in the 20s. So for that generation, there are, especially in rural communities where they had been forced to resettle their communities after Confederation, et cetera, and kind of give up a way of life, there was a lot of families who the fathers didn't talk to the sons because one voted for or against Confederation. So it took a while, I think, for Newfoundlanders to feel Canadian.
I will be talking to actor, writer, and comedian Mark Critch.